Let's discuss this a little further with Tim Anderson, who's the director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies, who joins us from Sydney. Welcome to the program, Tim Anderson. When you take a look at the way that the Western media actually covered this story, they tried to somewhat paint it in a negative light when it's the red lines had read the three countries or four countries that are under U.S. sanctions are getting together and so forth and so on. But really, if you take a look at it, as our headline read, where Iran's president said that there's a new world order that's being shaped. That's a world order that has pushed back against U.S. imperialism in a sense. If you agree with that, can you expand a little bit further on that issue?
Yes, it's a very important step because the three Latin American countries, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, are under coercive measures. We should call them coercive measures, not sanctions. They're not really judicious measures. They are a type of siege warfare against independent peoples, independent states, just as they impose these sorts of sieges on the peoples of West Asia. They impose them on the peoples of Latin America. So it's very important, I think, the strategic relations that already exist between Iran and Venezuela, and I believe President Raeisi is saying he wants to extend that strategic relationship to Nicaragua and Cuba, to smaller countries, but nevertheless with significant capacity and significant political will. That raises the question of cooperation and alliances across continents and across cultures. So the principles of independent states, the principles of resistance, are crossing those cultures, and we're seeing some actual fruits of it. Already those benefits are in place between Iran and Venezuela. There's a motor vehicle industry there. There's cooperation in energy, in finance, in defense, and in heavy industry. So I think that we're likely to see some new fruits out of this new strategic partnership.
And not so much the volume of trade that they want to raise, obviously, between the two, that's as important as what these two countries represent. And we just talked about one aspect of it, but the other, which cannot be ignored, is in terms of oil and gas reserves. I mean, we're looking at Iran and Venezuela, which are the holders of the top five when it comes to those energy reserves. And if you look at it in a bigger picture, you could also put Russia in there. And then, of course, China. And you know, altogether, I think it amounts to about 40% of the world's energy reserves. Isn't that a big deal, especially when it comes in today's energy landscape, where there's somewhat of a shortage of it, and especially when the U.S. Is against all these countries that I just mentioned?
Yes, it's a very big deal, and that's why the strategic relationships between Russia and Iran are developing quite rapidly now since last year. And similarly with Venezuela and Iran, really Venezuela plays a quite similar role in Latin America to Iran in West Asia, in the sense that it is very energy rich, and it underwrites and supports the other independent peoples of that region. It gives the capacity, for example, for little countries with a big political will like Cuba to carry on doing what they're doing in terms of biomedicines, in terms of health cooperation and so on. So Venezuela has a similar role, and for that reason I think it'll be a vehicle for the transmission of the benefits of cooperation between the two regions, between West Asia and between Latin America. But it's with energy, of course, that and the similar obstacles that are faced, that they are finding ways around these sorts of obstacles. So, for example, when the US imposed these new coercive measures against Russia, they then found that there was an energy crisis, and Biden sent his team down to Venezuela and to talk with the Venezuelan delegation in Mexico and try and open up Venezuela's energy reserves to the US, because they realized, I suppose, they were shooting themselves in the foot by imposing these coercive measures on most of the big oil exporters. And then after that, of course, they didn't get their way with the Saudis. The Saudis refused to increase production to cover for the mess that the US had made for itself.
Thank you very much for that. We appreciate it. Tim Anderson there, Director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies. Thank you.